11 ways to repurpose a single piece of content. So if you blog or if you have a podcast like I do, or you write for magazines or you do articles or something consistently, then this is definitely a podcast episode you need to listen to. 11 ways to repurpose just one single piece of content. All right, let's do it. Why, hey there, my podcast family. Welcome to episode 53 of the Small Business Made Simple podcast. And Happy New Year. 2020 is here. Fucking hell. Because 2020 is here. I remember as a young girl, and I was born in the 70s, thinking about the year 2020, dreaming and wondering what my life would look like that far in the future. It was almost inconceivable, the year 2020. And all of a sudden, I blink and it's here. And I guess I could never have imagined the life that I'm actually living now. You know, the good, the bad, and the sensational. I couldn't have imagined any of this when I was a child, but I do have some really strong memories of thinking about 2020 as a kid. Did you? Did you have these sort of thoughts when you were growing up as well about what 2020 would look like? I'd love you to share. Anyway, as usual, thanks for lending me your ears today. I know you have lots of choices out there, and I sincerely thank you for making me one of them. If you're a first-time listener, then super welcome. I'm so pleased to have you here on the podcast with me. I am the host, Jen Donovan, and it's my job via this podcast, via social media, and really anywhere else that I live and interact, is to make your life simpler. Because business can be really lonely, it can be a little bit hard, it can be a little bit complicated, and it's rarely easy, but it should be simple or at least simpler. So that's my commitment to you on the Small Business Made Simple podcast. Make your life simpler. One way I can help with that is if you join my Facebook group, Like-Minded Business Owners. It's really a place where you can go and get asked really great questions and get answers. You can, come along and enjoy the journey with other small business owners just like you. Of course, if you haven't joined, then, simply go to Facebook and search Like-Minded Business Owners, or, of course, come to the show notes at socialmediaandmarketing.com.au/53 and find the link there in the show notes. Every week for the past year, I've actually put out a podcast, and I know there's quite a few of you out there that have really come along this journey with me. So, of course, there's already 52 of these episodes out there. Many of you possibly podcast yourselves, or if not, many of you probably podcast yourselves. If not, many of you probably do a podcast yourselves. And if not, then maybe that's something to think about with the new year and New Year's resolutions. But of course, me thinking that podcasting is so great is actually probably a subject for a future episode. But perhaps you don't podcast, but you write blogs and you write them consistently. Hopefully weekly, but at least consistently. There's a lot of time and effort and energy that goes into creating original content just like this. A lot of work. And it doesn't really make sense that, you market it once or twice and then you move on to the next blog or the next podcast episode. And it's really a pattern I actually see with content creators. They are brilliant at creating the content. It's like literally their jam, but they miss out on so much traction not repurposing enough and often enough, which is what's inspired this episode, 11 ways to repurpose a single piece of content, plus lots of tips and tricks along the way as well that I have up my sleeve for you. So why repurpose? If that's your question, well, because this is what I think anyway, despite what some people might believe and not. So why repurpose? Well, Literally because despite what some people believe, not everyone sees everything you put on social media or opens every piece of email marketing you send, and therefore putting it under their nose more often than once is really quite necessary to build some traction, to build some movements, and of course to build your expertise. So if they don't see it or read it or watch it, then they actually won't know how brilliant you are. So that's why we need to repurpose. So let's dig in. 11 ways. Way number 1, submit to media outlets for free PR. This is probably the least obvious and the one that actually needs to be thought of first. For a media outlet to perhaps pick up your content, you need several things, but original content is probably one of the most important. So before you publish your blog on your own platforms, consider submitting it to some media outlets for some free PR, both around your business and around your expertise. If you've never done free PR before, then go back and have a listen to episode 14, so socialmediaandmarketing.com.au/14, where I actually chatted with PR expert Jules Brooke. PR can do wonders for your business, your expertise, and of course, your bottom line, which is what we want at the end of the day. And plus, if you get something published, then you can repurpose that published piece in all the ways I'm about to talk about again. So less obvious, but probably needs to be thought of first if you're thinking about getting some free PR. My second way to repurpose is to share on social media. No matter what platform you're on, once your blog or your podcast is actually published to your platform, share it on social media. Write an engaging couple of lines which leads to a call to action. Like click here to read more, or and share the heck out of it on social media with the link, of course, linking back to your blog or to your podcast. The third way to repurpose a piece of content is to create some short videos. Video is king, and it has been for a little while now. And this is a great way of getting some really quick, engaging video out there. Either record yourself talking about 1 or 2 points mentioned in your blog, and we really are only talking about 1 or 2 points, or of course your podcast, and post on social media. Again, with a call to action following that up. If it's a podcast you're repurposing, you can create your own little videos from the audio, especially if you publish on, say, YouTube as well. So you can do like a screencast of a section of your podcast from YouTube. Again, repurpose on social media. Some tools for doing some short videos that I use and are quite fabulous are Loom, Wave with a double V, and Headliner. I've got links to all those in the show notes, but they're great little tools for doing really short video, making it quick and simple and easy to get out there. The fourth way to repurpose is a LinkedIn article. So LinkedIn actually has a platform for publishing articles, and apparently Sunday is the best day for publishing articles on LinkedIn to get traction. Go figure. I don't know. Anyway, simply cut and paste your article into LinkedIn, create a banner, put a call to action at the end, of course, which might be, come to my website to read more great articles or listen to my podcast here, click here. Now, of course, if you are repurposing a podcast, then I am actually assuming that you've done show notes. It's the show notes that you'd really tailor here. Cut and paste them, tailor them a little bit to make them more into an article. Of course, just doing show notes itself is another way of repurposing your podcast. The fifth way to repurpose one single piece of content is, of course, to email your list. Holy cow, do you actually forget to do this? So many business owners I speak to don't have an email list, and I cannot repeat often enough how important I think an email list is to your business. I've seen it work time and time again. So if you don't have one, then please make 2020 the year you'll put in some time and effort to building one. Of course, email your list with your blog or your podcast. And there's a couple of ways that I've used. There's many ways that you can actually do this, but I've used two in particular. The first one was a really short email, just basically introducing the blog a little bit, maybe sharing one or two paragraphs from the blog, and then simply a call to action that says, click here to read on. And basically then that link would go to your website, and that's where they would read the rest of the article or rest of the blog that you've sent them. So of course that is really, really handy for SEO purposes, and things like that, getting people to stay on your website longer and longer. Of course, the second way is to write more of an engaging email that talks about the subject of the podcast or the blog that you've written. It's a little longer. It has a bit of a longer hook to it, and it's probably a little more, I guess, in my opinion, personality packed. It's a little bit more about you, has a little bit more emotion, a little bit more feeling, a little bit of a story to it rather than just, a couple of paragraphs, like I said before, a couple of paragraphs and with a, click here to read more. It's a little bit more of a story that's engaging with a hook. Of course, it still has a call to action. Email lists are super, super important. Email lists are super, super important. And if you haven't listened to episode 9 and 10 of this podcast, then I suggest you go back and have a bit of a listen to them. Of course, you can find the links to those in the show notes, but basically they're socialmediamarketing.com.au/9, and then, of course, the same URL/10. Number 6 is to use stories. And when I'm talking stories, I'm talking Facebook stories and Instagram stories. Those little rectangle or round circles that sit at the top of our social media platforms. It's really where the eyes are at the moment on social media. Places like Canva.com has some really great templates for stories, as does my favorite little app, Story Art. Of course, the links for Canva and Story Art are in my show notes. Create stories, and again, have some call to actions in them, but it's where the eyes are. So it's really important to be using Facebook stories and Instagram stories heading into 2020 and beyond. Look, I'll go out on a limb and say if you're not using stories, then you are 100% missing out on eyeballs that would really like to see your content. The 7th way to repurpose some content is to actually do some long form on social media. So what I mean about that was, like, number 2 was all about sharing on social media, but this one, number 7, is a little bit more about sharing a story, doing some long form captions, again, leading to the same call to action, but it's rather than, this is my latest blog, it talks about X, Y, and Z, click here. It has more emotion, it has more of a story, because of course if you have listened to me for any length of time, you'll know I say I talk a lot about humans interact with humans, H to H. People will get to know you, love you, and trust you when you give them a little bit more on social media. Let them in, let them know a little bit about why you wrote what you wrote or what's in it for them if they actually take the time out of their day and read your article or, of course, listen to your podcast. And just a little tip with that. If you write a really good email, how I was saying email marketing just before, if you write a really good email, sometimes you can actually repurpose that email and put it here into your long form and put it here when you are doing long form social media posts. All right. Tip number 8 for repurposing content, turn your content into a webinar or a Facebook Live. Now, this one might take you out of your comfort zone a little bit, and indeed it might not be appropriate for every episode, but it's definitely worth considering. I know I turned 4 of my most popular podcasts into webinars last year, and it really extended my audience, probably 20-fold in the end. If you don't have webinar software, you can use software that I've had something to do with in the past is Easy Webinar, GoToWebinar, and Zoom, of course. Of course, all links to those are in the show notes. But of course, if you don't have that software, then you might actually consider doing a Facebook Live. Nothing says expert like putting yourself out there live with live interaction with your audience. And if you're going to do that, encourage questions, whether it's on a live webinar or a Facebook Live. Encourage your audience to interact with you. And of course, always have a call to action. You're really getting this right. Please tell me you're getting this. You always need to be leading your audience to the next step. Don't leave them guessing. Show them every time what you want them to do next by having a call to action. The 9th way to repurpose content is sharing to Facebook or LinkedIn groups. If your article or your podcast has something in it for the reader or the listener, which clearly it would and clearly it does, then think of ways that you can share that content into groups. Look for groups that have specific days to share content, like maybe they might have an episode Monday or a tips Tuesday, etc., etc. There are lots of groups out there do give you the opportunity to self-promote at least one day of the week. So use them to your advantage. Make sure you make a list of the groups and the days that you can post in those groups and repurpose your content in them. Of course, my Facebook group, Like-Minded Business Owners, has Sharing Monday and Offer Thursday that you can repurpose and, sell and, give your expertise on those days inside my group. If you're not a member, then maybe you better chuff over and join in the fun at Like-Minded Business Owners. Of course, I will just say when it comes to putting things into Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups, don't make that the only time you're in there is when you're trying to sell your own content or, repurpose your own content. Make sure you are an active member of those groups and give as well as get. Number 10 is Pinterest. Pinterest, that social media platform that's really quite a powerful search engine that we actually keep forgetting about. If you write blogs or have a podcast, then you really should be looking at Pinterest. It's something I'm actually going to invest in 2020. No doubt I will be sharing my results with you as the year goes on. But for me, it is actually something I'm looking to outsource. My plate's a little full, and of course, I will let you know how it goes. But it is something that I'm wanting to put some time and effort into, is Pinterest in 2020. I'd really encourage you to investigate it yourself. And I've actually got a really great episode coming up with a Pinterest guest. My little Pinterest expert, Belinda, will be on the podcast. I think it might even be the next episode. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that one. Really interesting concept if you haven't thought of Pinterest before for repurposing content. Number 11, my last one, is of course to create quotes from your blogs or from your podcast into graphics. And my absolutely hands down favorite platform for creating these graphics is actually canva.com. Pull some really engaging quotes from your content and make them into a graphic, and of course share them on social media. It's one of the simplest ways to repurpose your content. And of course, always make sure you have that call to action. So that was my 11 ways to repurpose one single piece of content. I hope you're really impressed with those. But more importantly, I hope they've actually been inspired to repurpose. You'll see that all 11 are actually free ways to repurpose your content. I haven't gone into Instagram ads or Facebook ads or anything like that. So they've all been free ways. I think that's paid ways is probably another episode altogether. There's lots of other ways, of course, to repurpose your content. Perhaps not all your content, but definitely a good section of it. And so I'm just going to quickly run through some of those that, even though I've given you 11, these are just some other ones that I know of. Some of them I've used, some of them I have not. So you can also share your blog or your show notes on platforms such as Missing Letter, Medium, Quora, and SlideShare. Links to all those are, of course, in the show notes. You can build an infographic from the information you've actually shared in that blog or in that podcast. To make some really great graphics, there's Pictochart and also Canva. Links in the show notes, of course. You can, if your blog has actually got lots of stats in it. Twitter users love stats, so make sure you're turning those into graphics and sharing them on Twitter to get some love over there. And of course, my last thought was actually creating spin-offs from your blog, because perhaps the subject that you've used in your blog, maybe you've just touched on other subjects within that blog that of course could be a piece all of their own. So you can repurpose that blog by having links to the next blog that maybe goes a little bit deeper into one particular part of the blog. So there you have it. All the ways that I can think of at the beginning of 2020 to repurpose your content. If you can think of another, or you actually do something else that I haven't mentioned, let me know. Send me a DM on Instagram. I am at Small Business Made Simple, or put it into the group of like-minded business owners. Or, of course, you can send me an email, Jen, Jen, at jendonovan.com.au. I'd really love to hear what you're doing that's for repurposing that's a little bit different to what I've mentioned here today. So that's a wrap. Let's go through the 11 again. Get published, get some free PR, share on social media with a link, video, LinkedIn article, email your list, share in stories, long form posts, tell a story, turn into a webinar or a Facebook Live, share into Facebook and LinkedIn groups, make graphics with quotes from the article and share those on social media and Pinterest. All right, guys. All right, my lovely listener, that is a wrap for episode 53 and the first one of 2020. Let's really hit the ground running with 2020 and maybe make repurpose the word for you for the year. It is so important. Repurpose. We have to stop reinventing the wheel all the time. But big love, my podcast family. I will be back next Thursday I will be back next Thursday with a special guest, actually, all about finding the right way to engage a social media agency. I've got a great guest on who runs a social media agency, and I'm going to chat to her about how you find someone to do your social media for you if that is in fact what you'd like to do in 2020. It's a good one. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss that episode. If you're still in gift giving mode, I would love a rating or a review. If you're a listener of this podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day and leave me a review, especially if you listen through iTunes. Those things are like gold for podcasters like me. If where you listen doesn't allow you to do a rating or review, head over to my Facebook site, Social Media and Marketing Australia, and maybe leave me a Facebook review or even a Google review. That would be sensational. And of course, it would mean the world to me. But again, that's all for episode 53. I'd love to connect with you on social, so let's get social on social. I'm on all the platforms, so let's make sure we do that this week. And of course, remember my small business peeps, as my opening song says, there is no point in dreaming small.